My name is Lena Parker, and I am 32 years old. I went to my parents' house in Laurel Canyon on Christmas Eve, carrying a small gift and telling myself this year would be different. I was prepared for the awkward smiles, for the shallow greetings, and for the forced family warmth. What I was not prepared for was the greeting I actually received. The moment I stepped through the door, my sister turned toward me with a look that held no hesitation, no confusion, only certainty. "Why are you even here?" Her voice was sharp enough to stop me in place. I looked at her, waiting for someone else to speak, for someone to correct her, to soften the blow. Instead, my parents spoke with the same steady calm people use when pointing out something obvious. "You're not welcome here. You understand that, don't you?" There was no shouting, no chaos, just conviction. The lights on the tree glowed softly behind them, a scene that should have felt warm, but there was nothing warm about the atmosphere in that room. I stood still long enough to feel something shift inside me, something that had been slowly building for years, the countless bills I covered without being asked, the emergencies I handled because no one else would. The quiet sacrifices that became invisible, expected routine. I did not ask why. I did not defend myself. I did not fight for a place that had never actually been offered to me. I simply turned around, walked back out to my car, and drove home in silence. That night, I opened every account, every subscription, and every automatic payment I had set up for them over the years. I did not hesitate. I removed every card. I canceled every service. I closed every link that tied me financially to that house. By morning, the consequences reached them, and the doorbell at my apartment rang without stopping. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you were me standing in that doorway that day, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments. Growing up in the Parker household meant learning early that some responsibilities were spoken and others were simply implied. From the outside, we probably looked like any other family in a small Ohio neighborhood. Inside, though, there was a rhythm that everyone understood. I was expected to hold things together, to manage myself, and to be the one who thought ahead. Mallory, my sister, went through childhood with an ease I never knew. Every misstep softened, every inconvenience adjusted around her, as if the world itself bowed a little to make room. It was not something she declared openly. It was something everyone else silently enabled. Our mother had a way of smoothing Mallory's mistakes without ever addressing them. If Mallory misplaced something, Mom would search until she found it. If Mallory forgot a deadline, Mom would make a call or write a note. Meanwhile, if I needed help, the answer was usually a reminder that I was capable, that I was the organized one, and I would figure it out. At first, I took pride in that. Being dependable felt like a strength. I did not realize how easily strength becomes expectation, and how quickly expectation turns into burden. Our father rarely intervened. He stayed in the background of most decisions, as though conflict were something happening on a screen, rather than in his own home. He did not raise his voice, and he did not object. Silence was his way of keeping peace. Over time, that silence became the foundation that held every imbalance in place. When one parent steps back, the other fills the space. And in our family, that meant Mom's version of fairness went unquestioned. When I moved out to start working after college, I thought physical distance would shift the dynamic. I rented a small apartment, bought my own groceries, and felt proud of being responsible for myself. It did not take long before Mom began calling with small requests. It started with something like an unexpected bill or a car repair that strained the household budget. I wanted to help. I told myself this was temporary. Families help each other. I sent money without thinking too hard. Those small requests became routine. Then routine became assumed. I started covering a utility bill here and there. After a while, they simply started listing me on the account. I told myself it was easier that way. I was earning steady pay, and helping made life smoother for everyone. I did not ask for anything in return. I did not even ask for acknowledgement. I just kept doing what seemed to be needed. Years passed and the pattern only strengthened. If Mallory wanted something the family could not afford, the conversation shifted subtly until I felt that stepping in was the reasonable thing to do. I convinced myself that I was being generous and mature. But something changed the day I realized no one said thank you anymore. Not even casually. It was as though my contributions had been rewritten into something expected, something owed. If I hesitated or questioned a request, I was met with confusion, then disappointment, then frustration, as if I were the one disrupting the natural order of things. The longer I supported them, the more I felt myself fading from the narrative. I was not appreciated. I was a resource. A background fixture meant to stabilize the house that I no longer lived in. My generosity had stopped being kindness. It had become obligation, and no one else even noticed the shift. 3 years earlier, I had moved to Laurel Canyon after accepting a position as a registered nurse at a mid-sized hospital in Los Angeles. I remember the first weeks clearly, the unfamiliar streets winding up the hills, the quiet mornings layered with birds and soft air, and the feeling that I had finally reached a version of adulthood I had been working toward for years. The work was demanding, and there were days when I stood for hours without rest, shifting from patient to patient, carrying stories of fear and hope that were not mine, but still settled into my chest when I went home. Yet I felt steady. I had built something for myself. I paid my rent on time. I bought groceries with money that I earned. I took pride in that. My mother was proud too, but in a different way. Pride for her came wrapped in subtle expectation. Calls from her always began warmly asking how the job was going, whether I was settling in, if I needed anything. Then the tone would shift toward updates about what was happening at home. Mallory was between jobs again. A bill had come up unexpectedly. The car needed new tires. Each situation presented as unfortunate, temporary, just needing a little help to bridge the gap. I always wanted to be supportive. I told myself I was helping us all move forward. So I sent money. Sometimes a small amount. Sometimes more than I was comfortable with. It was easier to send it than to question why it was needed. Mallory rarely said much to me directly. She would text or message briefly with the assumption that I would step in. If she did call, her voice carried a lightness that suggested the problem was simple and that I had always been the one who could fix things quickly. My mother reinforced that without saying it outright. She would tell me Mallory was going through a difficult time, that she needed space, that things had not sorted out for her yet. The implication was that as her sister, I should fill the gaps while she found her direction. My father remained quiet through most of these conversations. If we spoke, he would ask how I was doing, but would not mention anything about the financial strain. His silence had weight. It pressed responsibility toward me, even though he never spoke the words. Over time, these requests blended into routine. Payments became automatic. I covered phone bills, helped with groceries, even paid for repairs in the house I no longer lived in. Whenever I hesitated, my mother would remind me that families support each other, that we were all connected no matter where life took us. I believed her, or maybe I wanted to believe her. I told myself that helping was a natural extension of love. Yet there were days when I would come home from a 12-hour shift and sit alone in my living room, surrounded by quiet, and feel something tighten in my chest. Not regret exactly, but fatigue. A tiredness that came from carrying more than I could name. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was strong enough. I had always been strong. But the truth is that even strength has limits, and I was slowly approaching mine without realizing it. One summer afternoon, Mallory decided to host a gathering at the house. It was nothing extravagant, just a casual get-together with a few of her friends from work. She asked me to come early, and the way she phrased it made it sound like she needed help setting up, not that she wanted me there as a guest. I arrived with a bag of groceries, because she had mentioned needing snacks. When I walked in, Mallory was already laughing with two women I had never met before. She did not introduce me right away. Instead, she handed me a cutting board and asked if I could slice vegetables, as if that had always been my role in her social life. I tried to ignore the feeling that settled in my stomach. I told myself I was just helping, that it did not mean anything. But the longer I stood there preparing food while everyone else talked in the living room, the clearer it became that I had been invited to serve, not to join. At one point, one of Mallory's friends asked how I liked living in Laurel Canyon. Before I could answer, Mallory spoke for me. She said something about how I was doing fine but still figuring things out. She said it with a tone that suggested I was still in transition, still unstable, still dependent. I felt the back of my neck get warm. I tried to speak up and explain that I had a stable position at the hospital. Mallory laughed and waved her hand like I was overreacting. She told them I worked too much and did not know how to relax, making my efforts sound like foolishness. My mother watched from the corner of the room. She smiled along with Mallory, as if joining the laughter was easier than interrupting it. When I caught her eye, she gave me a look that said I should not take things to heart, that everything was just a joke. But the jokes kept coming, and each one chipped away at something I did not know was fragile. At some point, Mallory made a comment about how I was the responsible one because someone had to be. Her voice was sweet on the surface, but the implication was sharp. The room laughed again. My father walked in halfway through the evening. He seemed to catch the tone, but did not address it. Later in the kitchen, he told me quietly not to let it bother me that Mallory did not mean anything by it. His words were gentle, but they felt like another way of saying that the situation was not going to change, that the cost of peace was silence. I realized then that my place in the family had become something performed publicly. I was the safe target, the one who would never push back, the one whose contributions could be rewritten as obligations and whose achievements could be softened into insignificance. I did not say anything. I stayed and helped clean up after the guests left. I went home later that night and sat in my car for a long time before going inside. I would like to say that moment changed something immediately. It did not. I swallowed the feeling again. I told myself I was strong. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding. But a fracture had opened, and I knew it. That Christmas Eve felt colder than any winter I could remember. The street outside my parents' house was lined with cars, the windows glowing warm amber light, laughter spilling through the walls before I even reached the door. I had spent the afternoon choosing a thoughtful bottle of wine, something I knew my father liked, something that felt like a small peace offering. I wanted to believe that maybe this year would be gentler. When I stepped inside, the room fell quiet for a split second, just long enough for me to feel the shift in the air. Mallory was the first to speak, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "Why are you even here?" she said, as if my presence was an intrusion rather than a family member coming home for the holiday. I tried to respond with calm, but before I could, my mother spoke over me. "You're not welcome here. Can't you understand?" That my father stood beside her, not echoing the words, but not challenging them either. His silence pressed heavier than any accusation. There was no argument and no dramatic scene. I simply placed the wine on the counter, though no one reached for it, and stood still long enough to realize that I was not considered part of the celebration. Mallory continued greeting her friends and cousins, her tone bright and effortless, as if the moment had never happened. My mother began arranging plates. My father disappeared into the hallway. The message was not only spoken aloud, but reaffirmed through every gesture. I belonged outside the frame of their lives, unless I was paying for the stability behind it. I looked around the room and noticed how normal everything appeared. The string lights, the wreath, the pile of presents waiting to be opened. Yet beneath that image was a truth that had been growing for years. I had been included only when I was financially useful. The warmth of family was something extended to me, conditionally withdrawn the moment I stopped giving. That realization did not arrive as a sudden revelation. It settled quietly, like something I had known all along, and finally allowed myself to acknowledge. So I left. I did not raise my voice or demand fairness. I did not ask anyone to explain their cruelty or reconsider their words. I stepped back through the same door I had entered while their laughter resumed behind me. The cold air outside felt clearer than the warmth inside had ever been. When I got home, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I logged into the financial accounts I had been managing for years, the phone bill tied to the entire family plan, the joint credit line I had been covering, my parents' insurance premium that automatically drafted from my account each month, the emergency fund that everyone assumed simply existed without question. I removed my name from every payment authorization. I canceled every auto draft. I closed every shared account. I did not leave a message or explanation. I did not warn them. I let the system speak when the time came. I felt no triumph, only a profound stillness. It was the first decision I had made solely for myself in a very long time. The house I came from had asked me to carry its weight without acknowledgement. Leaving that role was not an act of revenge. It was the final step in recognizing my own worth. The next morning, while I made coffee, I imagined the unraveling, the confusion, the panic, the realization. And I understood something quietly and completely. I had not walked away in anger. I had walked away because it was finally time to stop asking for a place that was never freely given. A few days had passed since the night of the holiday gathering when the consequences of my decision began to unfold. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly, then escalated with a force that revealed just how deeply my support had been woven into the foundation of that house. The first sign came when the home Wi-Fi auto payment failed. Then the electricity bill bounced. The insurance for the family car was flagged for non-payment. Even the monthly health insurance, the one they always assumed would renew without question, froze. Every system that had depended on my silent contribution suddenly stalled. I did not witness the confusion firsthand, but I could imagine it with unsettling clarity because I had lived inside that house long enough to know exactly how they reacted to inconvenience. Mom was always the first to shift from surprise to narrative building. Instead of addressing the very straightforward reality that these accounts had been paid entirely by me for years, she chose a version of events that allowed her to maintain her dignity. She began calling relatives friends, church acquaintances, and even neighbors, painting a story where I had abandoned the family without warning. She used phrases like Lena turned her back on us, and we always supported her, and this is how she repays us. She did not mention that I had been the one supporting them financially. She did not mention that for years no one had asked whether the cost was sustainable for me. She did not mention the moment on Christmas when they told me I was not welcome. In her retelling, the wound belonged entirely to her. Dad tried to contact me several times. His voice messages were careful, measured, and indirect, asking if something had happened and whether I was feeling overwhelmed. He never acknowledged the words spoken to me in that living room. He never acknowledged his silence while they were spoken. If he could maintain the illusion that the problem was emotional rather than structural, then he could avoid responsibility. I listened to each message once, felt the familiar ache, and let the phone fall silent again. Mallory turned to social media, which had always been her stage. She posted vague statements about betrayal, family loyalty, and how some people forget where they came from. Her friends filled the comments with sympathy, offering validation without context. She did not need to explain the situation because her followers had always seen her as the center. The world would adjust to her version of events the same way our family had always done. I did not respond there either. Remaining silent was not withdrawal. It was strategy. If I defended myself publicly, the narrative would turn into argument, and argument would turn into performance. I did not need to perform for anyone. The truth did not require an audience. It was during this time that Renee came to see me. She knocked on my apartment door without announcement. When I opened it, she simply held a bag of groceries in her arms, as if bringing something to steady the ground rather than to intrude. We sat at my small kitchen table, steam rising from 2 mugs of tea, while the late afternoon light settled across the floor. She did not ask me to explain. She had seen enough over the years to understand the pattern. She only said, "They are reacting to the loss of access, not the loss of you." The distinction stayed with me. It gave language to something that had previously only existed as exhaustion. I realized that for so long I had believed that my role in the family was tied to love, but in reality it had been tied to utility. When my utility was removed, my absence was felt only in terms of inconvenience. Recognizing that truth was painful, but it was also clarifying. I chose not to call them, not to respond, not to correct the story. I chose stillness. Let the narrative run without me. Let their discomfort reveal itself. For the first time, I understood that silence could be power, not surrender. A week after that Christmas night, the silence around me no longer felt sharp. It simply existed like a new layer of air I had learned to breathe. I continued working at the clinic, driving the familiar route up the winding streets back to my apartment in Laurel Canyon, preparing my meals, watering my plants, and letting the quiet remind me that peace can be uneventful. I did not check messages or scroll to see what had been posted about me. I allowed distance to do what words never could. One afternoon, while I was finishing chart notes in the break room, my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. The message was brief, almost cautious. "Lena, this is Amy. We used to all know each other in high school. I was close with Mallory back then. Would you be open to talking?" I paused before answering. My memory of Amy had always been different from my memory of Mallory's other friends. Amy never spoke over others, never laughed the loudest, never tried to impress anyone. She observed. She understood things without needing them explained. So I agreed to meet her at a small cafe off Ventura Boulevard after my shift. When I walked in, she had already found a quiet table near the window. She did not start with greetings or polite conversation. Her expression already told me that whatever she brought with her was not small. She unlocked her phone, set it in front of me, and said, "I think you need to see this. I should have shown it to you sooner. I just didn't know how." On the screen, I saw a group chat. The participants were Mallory Mom, 2 of Mallory's close friends, and Dad. The messages stretched back far longer than I expected. The earliest ones were from months before I moved to Laurel Canyon. I scrolled through slowly, making sure I absorbed every sentence rather than reacting too quickly. Mom wrote instructions on tone, on phrasing, on how to imply disappointment without sounding harsh. Mallory detailed which bills to bring up and the emotional angle that would make me feel responsible. They exchanged notes on timing, on when I was most likely to agree, on how hesitation from me should be met with silence so I could fill it with guilt. Mom described it as guiding Lena to do what she would do anyway. There was no confusion in those messages. There was planning, cooperation, strategy. Dad appeared only occasionally, but each time he did, his words were clear. He did not want to discuss emotion and did not want to appear involved, but he was willing to benefit from the outcome. "I'll sign what needs signing," he wrote once. "Just don't drag me into the persuasion part." No one in that conversation spoke of my well-being, my boundaries, or my life. I was not described as a daughter or a sister. I was described in terms of reliability, predictability, usefulness. Reading it was not painful in the dramatic sense. It was something slower and heavier, like realizing the ground you thought was solid had been soft all along, and you were just now understanding how long you had been sinking. Amy let me finish reading before she spoke. She said she had watched it happen over time, that at first it seemed like family stress, and then patterns formed, and then excuses were repeated, and eventually it became clear that it wasn't confusion or miscommunication. It was intentional. She told me she did not participate, but she also acknowledged she had stayed silent longer than she should have. Her voice carried the weight of that. I thanked her because there was nothing else to say. Knowing the truth did not need commentary. It simply needed to be recognized. That night, I returned to my apartment and sat at the same kitchen table where I had ended the payments. But this time, the decision was not an act of hurt. It was recognition. I opened my phone, blocked every number, deleted every message thread, removed every remaining point of access. I did not leave explanations or warnings. Words had already been used against me long enough. There was no dramatic finale, no shouted conclusions, just a conclusion made quietly and completely. I did not walk away from my family. I walked back to myself. A month later, distance had settled fully into place. I had not spoken to my family since the night I walked away, and life continued in Laurel Canyon at its own gentle pace. I woke early, handled my work at the clinic, and spent my evenings reading or walking the quiet hills. There were moments when the silence felt unfamiliar, but never painful. It was simply new. Meanwhile, the consequences that followed my departure unfolded without my involvement. I heard about them gradually, not because I sought information, but because news travels in ways you cannot prevent. People talk when masks fall, especially when the masks were worn for the sake of presentation. Mallory was the first to feel it. The same circle of friends who once laughed along with her began to pull back when the group chat screenshots circulated quietly among them. They had tolerated the teasing, the small cruelties, and the dramatic performances, but the calculated manipulation was something different. It revealed intention planning and a lack of conscience. Invitations slowed and then stopped. Her social world did not collapse at once, but it thinned, leaving her surrounded mostly by people who benefited from her rather than cared for her. I did not feel triumph in that, just clarity. Mom's reputation shifted too. For years, she had positioned herself as a voice of guidance within her church group, a woman who held her family together through patience and wisdom. When whispers began about the group chat and the calculated guilt, the admiration she relied on became strained. No one confronted her directly, but there is a difference between being respected and being tolerated. The difference revealed itself quietly in small pauses and shorter greetings. Her world did not shatter. It simply dimmed. Dad faced the most concrete consequence. Without the payments I had maintained, the financial rhythm of the household changed sharply. Bills that had once been handled without discussion now required action. There was no one else to absorb the weight. He managed, but not gracefully. The structure he relied on had never been stable, only hidden. As for me, I did not return. I did not reconsider. I did not wait for apologies that would never come. I built a life that was smaller, quieter, and entirely my own. And for the first time, that was enough. Leaving is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply choosing yourself and letting the world adjust. I learned that love is not proved by endurance. Love does not require sacrificing your sense of self or carrying burdens others refuse to acknowledge. Families can fail to see you even while standing beside you. Walking away is not cruelty when staying means losing yourself. Protecting your peace is not selfishness, it is survival. Letting go can be the most compassionate act you offer to your own life. Thank you for staying with my story until the end. I appreciate your time and your willingness to listen. If you were in my position, confronted with the same silence and the same choices, what path would you take? I am genuinely interested in your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments so we can reflect together. Your voice matters here.